Sacheen Pointe, as well as Joe James Rampanen, and they're going to be talking a little bit more about ancestral pride, so let's give it up for them.
Hi, everybody. How you feeling? Woo. Okay. Wow, it's Sunday, so thanks for being here. I caught some talks that were really cool. I want to introduce myself. My name is Hope Hockelwit. I'm from Musqueam, Coast Salish. I'm also New Channel from the west coast of Vancouver Island, and I have Cree ancestry as well. So, just want to welcome you here to my territory and the territory of my ancestors, as she had introduced. And also just to say thank you for listening to us and what we have to say, and I'll allow my husband to introduce himself.
Clucko, I'd like to acknowledge the Coast Salish unceded territory we're upon. I'd like to acknowledge all the organizers to make this happen and the people present here to share a space, to share the air and share this energy. My name's Gwawina, Bark of the Raven. I'm of the Ahousaht Nation, Joe James, or Crow, as people call me. I'm from the Ahousaht Nation. We're like 30-minute boat ride out of Tofino. Most people know where Tofino is. We're like another 22 kilometers out the Pacific Ocean from Vancouver Island, and that's where we are in the heart of Clyquet Sound, within the New Channel territory, where the mountains greet the sea. We're with ancestral pride, Indigenous land defenders. I don't really care for using the word, personally, activist. To me, I'm Kuis. I'm a human being and following my path in life to live up to my roles and responsibilities to the land, to life, and to the future generations. With Ancestral Pride, we've been involved with many action camps throughout Turtle Island within our territory. And I'll give a really brief background of contact within my territory. And this theme is pretty well the same story across Turtle Island, across Indigenous lands. But our contact on the West Coast was just over 240 years ago. The British, the Spaniards, and the Russians were the first to come out into our territory. And as everywhere, it was all about the natural resources that they can exploit. And within our territory, at that time, in the 1770s, it was the sea otters, the sea otter pelts. And they went after that and brought that to near extinction. After that, it became whaling stations. Then it became the fish canneries, the commercial fishing industry, the logging industry. Now we're at mining activity of copper, the proposed mining activity within our territory of copper and gold mining, and fish farms, an abundance of fish farms within our territory. These are just some of the activity that's happening within our territory, our Hahotli. And as Kuis people, our core principles of life are Isak, respect, and Ishik Hisawak, the oneness, interconnectedness to land and life, that everything is connected, everything has a meaning. And we have a role to play in all of that, not to disrupt that oneness, that interconnectedness. Now, within our territory, the Indian Act was put in place in the 1880s, and with that came the reserve system, being confined to these prison camps that are reserves. Came residential schools, came, all the theft of our land, the theft of our children, the breakdown of who we were as a people. It was purposely put in place to extinguish us as who we were as Indigenous people and our identity and our connection to land. Where we are currently, there's outside of our reserve, the majority of land is crown land, private land, parklands, marine parks, and within the private lands is logging activity. We are the last low-lying temperate rainforest in the world. And there is still logging of old growth that happens. There's fish farms. There's mining projects slated for our territory. And all this is going on around us. And as Indigenous people, if our leadership, be it Indian Act elected leadership or hereditary leadership, are willing participants in resource extraction, and we want to have a share, or we want to be bought out, or we want jobs, or we want money, then that's encouraged. That's encouraged because that's viewed as progress, and we're being good Indians. That's encouraged to our jurisdiction is recognized. Our who we are upon our territory is recognized, as long as we want to be a part of that exploitation. Now, as well, some of the things that our Indigenous people engage in and pursue to retain our identity, to assert Aboriginal title and right, are academia, litigation, legislation, our culture, arts, be it music, theater, literature, even social activism, as long as it's civil and peaceful. And if it was, say, for example, out in the city here, as long as you apply for a permit to get designated an area in a designated time to do your protest, and you don't disrupt traffic, and you don't disrupt industry, and that's acceptable. But there's amazing work that has been done by all these sectors, be it academia, within litigation. Indigenous people have nearly 200 Canadian Supreme Court decisions ruled in favor of Indigenous people. Nearly 200 Supreme Court decisions. Rulings such as Aboriginal title and rights have never been extinguished. That came out of their court system, but then it comes down to they can't define what Aboriginal title and rights are. The different levels of government will bicker among themselves, and there's no definition of what that means. There's been court cases that have said, just recently, that have stated that any activity, negative activity within Indigenous territory, we need to be consulted. Prior to any of that activity happening, we need to be consulted. And these are, again, industry is constantly trying to decide where that falls in. Does that fall in within the Indian Act reserve areas? Does that fall outside? If it's private land, do they have to adhere to this? So there's all these cases that come forward, and we're constantly fighting that system to try prove within their structure that it's not going to disrupt our lives or have a negative impact upon our lands and waters. Through legislation, there's been many groups that have lobbied the government and worked within their system, within their bureaucratic system, to try have more control of our land and lives. And a lot of times, working within a system that has been designed to oppress Indigenous people, it's nearly impossible to work within the constructs of colonialism to uphold our rights as Indigenous people. I mean, there's been many United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, but Canada does not fully want to engage in that. So there's been all these things that happen in our favor, but we're outnumbered. We're outnumbered by the general population. We're outnumbered by the corporations that have an invested interest in exploiting our lands. And so with these things, I support them. These are any action that's going forward and creating awareness, creating information sharing is needed in our struggle. Something that happens within Indigenous land is that when Indigenous people go out there and make that stand in front of those machines to stop the resource extraction, to stop the exploitation, the contamination, the devastation upon our land, then we're viewed as criminals. We're viewed as agitators. We're viewed as, we're called ragtag, that we don't have no scientific basis for our opposition. We're just saying no just to say no. We're disrupting the national economy of this country. We're disrupting foreign investment into this country to keep this country running the way it is. And the government and industry has at their disposal the judicial system to remove anybody who is stopping any activity upon Indigenous lands. They have the RCMP, they have military force, they have emergency response teams, they have marine tactical units, they have DFO, they have all these forces to stop us, to silence us, to physically remove us from protecting our lands and our lives. And this happens over and over again. And the reality is, First Nations, Indigenous people out there are at the forefront of protecting the environment, of protecting marine life, of protecting all species of life. And these human beings, these individuals, they're not doing it because they get paid. They're doing it because it's a responsibility. It's a responsibility to land and life and the future generations. And for a lot of land defenders, it's a really, really difficult place to be. A lot of times, you're ostracized at times by your own community. You're out there with absolutely no support from anywhere else. And keep in mind, this is going on all across Turtle Island. This is going on all across Indigenous lands throughout the planet, that Indigenous people are making a stand and fighting against government and industry to protect land and life. And it's a really, really difficult place to be, because you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But at the time, a lot of the times, it's there's really no support or enough awareness reaching out into the broader communities across the land. And a lot of times, even if there are Indigenous alliances of resistance, it's hard to leave your fire in your territory, because it's happening all over. And the government and corporations are a unified front, with their corporate laws, with all their resources. And for a lot of Indigenous people, it's really hard to hold that line and at the same time be supportive of everything else that's going on everywhere else. And we got to keep in mind, right where we're at as human beings, we've got the Trans-Pacific Partnership happening right now. Foreign investment protection policies happening right now. All these corporations are aligning themselves to be in complete control, to continue the exploitation of the resources. So what happens on our end as Indigenous people, our stand, our voice becomes smaller and smaller, because it becomes so big that we don't know where to go to, what fire to be at, because it's happening all at once. And what I would want to suggest and bring here to this group, and to put out and to continue putting the message out, is we're all aware of what's happening to the planet. We're aware of what's happening to the ocean. We're aware of what's happening. And I honestly know that it's Indigenous people's relationship to the land, our cultural knowledge, our traditional knowledge, our connection to that land is vital towards the protection of the planet. And if we care about land and life and the ecosystem and the future generations, this is a call out that Indigenous people, they need support. They need support in any way that you can offer. If it means being informed, it means awareness, it means fundraising, in any way to support the Indigenous activists, Indigenous land defenders that are out there doing the work on the land for for life. Clucko.
He always does this, and then I am like, I got nothing. like, okay. I do want to talk a bit about the relationship between First Nations people here in BC and the settler people. And a really good way to do that is go to my website, ancestralpride.ca. And so I noticed a real kind of an internalized racism inside of the NGOs and the activism from non-Indigenous people and Indigenous people, and there's a lot of tokenism. And I've been doing this work for a few decades, since I was 17 years old. So it's been quite the journey, and I was getting really tired of feeling like I wasn't making any progress. So I wrote a couple of zines to help people kind of understand and conceptualize what it really means to decolonize yourselves, because we're pretty much almost already there. Decolonization is a really big buzzword for Indigenous people. We're pretty much decolonized. It's the settler nation who needs to decolonize themselves. So the zines are available on my website. I didn't bring any. I'm in the middle of a move. I'm sorry. I'm super disorganized. But the first one is called Everybody Wants to Be an Ally Until It's Time to Do Real Ally Shit. Because I was angry, and this really addresses a lot of these issues. You know, how to be a better ally to Indigenous people without creating a weird dynamic between us, and so that we can just move forward in this battle as human beings together. The second one was people took my advice so awesomely, they started appropriating Indigenous culture, which was weird. So I wrote another one, and it's a follow-up, and so it's like, you know, when does being a settler ally turned into being a settler appropriator and appropriating Indigenous culture, and how to check yourself. And so I had a bunch of really cool activists, settler activists, who we brainstormed together, and we came up with kind of a list of things to check yourself and to check others around you to make sure that you're not appropriating our culture, but you're being supportive of it, because there's a lot of different layers there. So I'm out of time, but check out my website, check out the zines. Oh, we do have some. Yes, woohoo, he's so organized, I'm not. So anyways, thank you, Chu, Kleko.